Here's Matt Walsh with some propaganda.
What is a woman? Can you tell me that? Well, you're at the Women's March. You must have some idea. Please, if one person could tell me what a woman is.
Well, let me give a stipulative definition that seems to me to be widely applicable. A woman is someone who sees in herself at least one attribute which she regards as a sufficient condition for her own membership in that category. What that attribute is can vary from woman to woman. The same definition applies mutatis mutandis to men. I think that's a pretty good definition. Matt, of course, clearly prefers archaic definitions of woman that tie womanhood to people who have gestational reproductive organs. He prefers this definition because he wants to disqualify trans women from womanhood.
Not here for women! We ask you to leave!
What is that?
I'm a husband. I'm a father of 4. I host a talk show. I give speeches. I write books. I like to make sense of things.
I get the impression that by make sense of things, Matt means that he likes to conceptualize things in ways that sufficiently demonize his perceived enemies.
A woman is not anything in particular.
There is not one particular thing.
It could be many things to many people.
Some women have penises, right? Some men have vaginas.
I like scented candles, and I've watched Sex and the City.
Yeah.
How do I know if I'm a woman?
That's a great question.
Well, Matt, if someone calls you a woman, how would that make you feel? Would you feel like that's a fitting term for you? I'm a man, not because of my inseminational reproductive system, but rather because when people call me a man, or they use masculine pronouns when referring to me, I get this feeling of consonance between my self-concept and the use of those words. It's hard to say exactly what, but there's something that just matches between how I feel about myself and how I see people who call themselves men, regardless of whether they have the same kind of reproductive organs I do. That's how I know I'm a man.
You're not a scientist. You're not a gender studies major.
No,
How do you know that you're a man?
I guess because I got a
And that's a perfectly fine criterion for one's own manhood if that's all being a man is to you. However, I expect that if he thought about it a bit more, he might have some more sophisticated criteria for his manhood. If he had to have that organ removed because of a malignant tumor, for example, I doubt he would say that he is no longer a man. Maybe he would. Maybe he would start identifying as non-binary or even as a woman, but I doubt it. It's clearly not a journey to discover the truth. It's a journey to make a boogeyman out of transgender people.
Can a man become a woman?
He can if he's gender fluid. This, however, is not what most trans people claim. Trans women who are not gender fluid don't often claim to have become women. Rather, they typically say that they have always been women. And if they do anything to transition, they're not transitioning from man to woman, but rather from an appearance that doesn't express their self-concept to one which does express their self-concept.
I'm not a woman, so I can't really answer that.
Women only know what women are.
Are you a cat?
No.
Can you tell me what a cat is? You want to tell us what a woman is?
Well, being a cat is not a feeling like a gender identity is. Ben Shapiro asked a similar question to a person defending trans people. He asked, "Why aren't you 60?" to someone who was clearly younger. The answer to that question is that, unlike gender identity, age is not subjective. The American Psychological Association published a very helpful document called Guidelines for Psychological Practice with Transgender and Gender Nonconforming People. This document specifies that gender identity is a person's deeply felt, inherent sense of being a girl, woman, or female, a boy, a man, or male, a blend of male or female, or an alternative gender. According to the American Psychological Association, gender identity is an inherent sense. It's a subjective feeling one has about oneself. Whether you are a cat or not is not an inherent sense. It is not subjective.
I'm a biological woman that medically transitioned to appear like a male. I will never be a man.
Okay, that's you. That's true according to what being a man means to you. Other folks who transition may define being a man to mean something else.
And so they go on the internet and they're told that all of their problems will be solved if they become a man.
Where are they reading that? Every pro-trans resource I've ever seen on the internet seems to have a pretty heavy focus on all of the bigotry one experiences when one is openly transgender. Show me these websites that say that all of a trans person's problems are solved by openly transitioning.
So you worry that there could be a sort of social contagion element of this?
A teeny tiny bit, maybe.
It got me at 42. Your child doesn't have a chance.
What do you mean it got you? This makes it sound like he was somehow tricked into transitioning. Scott Nugent still lives as a trans man and has apparently no interest in detransitioning. So in what sense was he got? If he thinks he was somehow tricked or manipulated into transitioning, why does he not detransition?
And you're affirming it with hormones that have never been used in this way.
What do you mean by never been used in this way? Administering hormones to trans people has been done for about 70 years now.
Puberty blockers, which are completely reversible.
Completely reversible.
One of the drugs used is Lupron, right? Which has actually been used to chemically castrate sex offenders.
He says this as though it's a rebuttal to the assertion that the effects are fully reversible, but it is, in fact, a total non sequitur. If the goal of castration were to induce permanent effects, why do it chemically? Why not do it surgically? That would certainly be permanent. Could the reason it isn't done surgically be precisely because if it were permanent and new evidence turned up that exonerated the convict, there would be no way to undo it? Doing it chemically is much safer, at least in part because it is reversible. Also, one of the main reasons why doctors use puberty blockers instead of jumping straight to HRT or surgery is precisely because doctors understand that young children need time to figure things out.
You know what? I'm not sure that we should continue with this interview.
So you don't want to talk about the drugs that you give to kids, or?
How can they be removing the healthy breasts of 15-year-old girls?
They're not. If a doctor agrees to do top surgery on a minor, it's because that doctor understands that retaining those breasts is not, in fact, in the interest of the patient's health.
There are masculine girls. There are feminine boys. What are we going to do about that? Carve them up?
People who oppose trans rights do a lot of concern trolling about masculine girls or feminine boys being pushed into transitioning against their will or being manipulated into transitioning. I'm sure you can find a few anecdotes from people who say that happened to them, but this issue pales in comparison to the number of trans people who are pressured into not transitioning. Detransitioners are a red herring intended to justify continuing to pressure people not to transition. If you look at the studies measuring the rates at which people decide to stop or reverse their transition, these rates are very low. And when you ask the folks who do detransition why they did it, the majority say they detransitioned due to pressure from friends, family, or an employer. Detransitioning due to social pressure seems like a much more common problem than transitioning due to social pressure.
How can this whole thing be happening, Matt?
Because the overwhelming preponderance of the medical evidence shows that it is the most conducive to the health of trans people. When you look at the difference between trans folks with the best mental health and those with the worst mental health, what makes the biggest difference between them is to what degree their gender identity is affirmed. The Williams Institute at UCLA found that minority stress experiences, such as family rejection, discrimination experiences, and a lack of access to gender-affirming healthcare, create added risks for transgender people.
Is it transphobic to tell the truth?
No, it's transphobic to say the things that you are saying which are not the truth. The reason I suspect conservatives are especially antagonistic about trans people is, firstly, because they need a boogeyman. A lot of conservative politics revolves around having an enemy to defeat. I also get the impression that maybe they see trans people as a threat to traditional gender roles. When you listen to conservative transphobes talk about women, I get this feeling that they want a clear definition so they know exactly who should be kept in the kitchen. There is also the tendency of conservatives to be hostile to any woman they see as unfit to be a sexual partner, regardless of whether they are cis or trans. Whenever you point out to conservatives that the science is on the side of the idea that gender identity is distinct from one's reproductive systems, they start conspiracy theorizing. Jordan Peterson sounds especially bitter when discussing the APA's guidelines.
Butchers and liars. We are sacrificing our children on the altar of a malicious far-left ideology. The medical profession is crumbling in response to radical transgender activists.
Instead of presenting evidence that the data that the medical community has collected on the matter is wrong, or presenting some argument explaining why they are interpreting the data incorrectly, he starts conspiracy theorizing that they are crumbling in response to radical transgender activists.
I saw a video the other day featuring an American surgeon bragging that he had performed more than 3,000 double mastectomies on young women who had paid for gender reassignment. Individuals confused, one might say encouraged, by those who profit from it into believing that their adolescent emotional trials can be cured and happiness reign forever if they subject themselves to this brutal practice.
He doesn't even seem to consider the possibility that doctors do this because of the evidence that it is actually good for their patient's health. He presupposes that it can't possibly be. He doesn't even acknowledge the fact that the rate of regret for these surgeries is very low. In fact, it's far lower than the rate of regret for surgeries generally.
And it is brutal, a process that often includes not only the aforementioned mastectomies, but other appalling surgical processes. Orchiectomy, that's castration in blunter language.
Peterson referred to the doctor who treated Elliot Page, who was in his 30s when he transitioned, as criminal. He doesn't seem to just believe that doctors who provide this treatment to children are deserving of a prison sentence, but also doctors who provide this treatment to 33-year-old men.
Whatever happened to the doctrine expressed by the ancient language as primum non nocere? First, do no harm.
Lots of surgeries can be portrayed as brutal. Surgery in general is a challenge to the squeamish. That doesn't make surgeries harmful. Many brutal kinds of surgery are done to prevent or reverse even more brutal consequences of not doing them. Show me the evidence that gender-affirming surgeries do more harm than good, because I can't seem to find it in the medical literature.
The Hippocratic Oath has been replaced by a delusion, a belief that can be summarized as, by blocking the puberty of children and then surgically altering them, we are only restoring what is theirs by right. A child's feelings are the final arbiters of their reproductive destiny, and any attempt to contest their gender identity risks increasing their proclivity for suicide. Lies. Lies. Lies.
Citation needed, citation needed, citation needed. Peterson's caricature of the medical consensus is a straw man, of course. A child's feelings are not the final arbiters which decide what treatment will be given to whom and how and when. They are, however, taken into account, and why shouldn't they when it comes to making decisions about what is best for their mental health? But even if Peterson could show studies that contradict and effectively refute the medical consensus on this issue, that would simply show the consensus to be mistaken. Even if the APA and every other major medical institution which endorses transition as a means of alleviating dysphoria happen to be promoting ideas that are false, which the preponderance of evidence seems to show is not the case, Peterson's paranoia, and in his words, ideological possession, apparently cannot conceive of this being merely a mistake. He must believe it to be a series of deliberate lies, explainable only by some vast conspiracy. Also, this fake concern about children is a thin end of a wedge. Matt Walsh and Jordan Peterson think it should be a crime for a doctor to provide gender-affirming treatment to anyone of any age. They focus on children now to try to gain sympathy, but their end goal is to prevent anyone from undergoing transition treatment of any kind ever. These conservatives who rail against what they see as big government tyranny want the government to get in between you and your doctor. They want the state to decide what medical procedures you can or cannot have, rather than your doctor. They apparently think the state knows better than you and the overwhelming consensus of the medical evidence about what medicine is best for you.
To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.